Hello, and yes, it has been almost a year since I've uploaded. I have just ran out of interest in this channel, but hopefully I will start uploading more because now it's summer, and that means that I will have a lot more free time to spend on making videos. So, first of all, I don't have that many credits, only 71. So, this won't be filled up with the best coasters in the world, but just my favorites from the parks that I've been to. So, anyway, here are my top 25 favorite coasters that I've ridden. So, at number 25, I put New Revolution at Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California. Now, this is a Schwarzkopf coaster that I really have nothing to say, except that it's just a really solid ride. It's pretty long, and the vertical loop is pretty intense and smooth, just like every other Schwarzkopf coaster. But let's just get to talking about the next coaster. So I'm going to do number 24 and 23 in the same spot, because they're pretty much the same coaster. But so here I have Goliath and Titan at both Six Flags Magic Mountain and over Texas. And these are a set of juvenile hypercoasters, and these rides are wildly underrated by the coaster community. Now, I know they're not too amazing, but everything other than the stupid mid-course breaks is pretty good, and I personally think that the first drop may be shallow, but it still gives a lot of floater airtime, which is pretty nice. But I don't want to make this video 90% me talking about how underrated these coasters are, so I'm just going to go to the next coaster. At number 22, we have another very underrated coaster, Viper at Six Flags Magic Mountain. This is an old aero hyperlooper that has the coaster community split. Either you like the coaster or you think it's one of the worst coasters in the park. And I think it's a pretty good coaster. Yeah, it might be a little rough, but its massive inversions are really intense, and it's just an overall long ride. Now, for number 21, it's probably the coaster on this list that I forget the most. Powder Keg at Silver Dollar City in Branson, Missouri. Powder Keg is an S&S launch coaster that happens to be one of the only coasters with a launch and a lift hill. And now, the launch is really good, and the airtime hill right after it has some serious ejector airtime. But I wish the drop had a bit more after it. But it's still a really solid ride. And at number 20, it's the Mr. Freeze clones at Six Flags Over Texas and St. Louis. Now, I have ridden both of these, and they're pretty much the same. One's just in a different direction. But Mr. Freeze Reverse Blast is a backwards launching Premier Rides coaster, and it's probably the best Premier Rides coaster. It has a very intense inverted top hat, and the scariest element that I've ridden is the massive 218-foot tall vertical spike that has you looking straight down. And then you do the whole thing again, but backwards. And yes, it's a pretty short ride, but it is an absolutely amazing and unique riding experience. Now at number 19, I have Accelerator, an Intamin launch coaster at Knott's Berry Farm in Buena Park, California. Now, similarly to Mr. Freeze, Accelerator is really short but also really intense, and they're both over 200 feet. But Accelerator has the most intense launch I have ever been on, and the massive top hat gives off some really good airtime. And now at number 18, it's the third launch coaster in a row. It's FullThrottle, a Premier Rides launch coaster at Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California. Now, most people wouldn't think that this is better than the two coasters before it, but I actually think this coaster is really amazing. The launch might not be the best, but everything after it is insane. The former tallest vertical loop has some of the best hang time in the world, and the backwards launch halfway through makes the ride really fun. And especially going on top of the loop is just such a surreal experience. And getting away from the launch coasters for a second, here's number 17, Shockwave, a Schwarzkopf coaster at Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington, Texas. And in my opinion, this is kind of a slightly overrated coaster, but it's still really good. And it is really short, but the drops aren't that good, but the double loops are pretty intense, and they're really intense for a long time, and the airtime on those drops are also pretty good. And now here is where most of the GCIs are. So at number 16, I have Shockwave, a GCI wooden roller coaster at Six Flags Magic Mountain. And to be honest, I don't really remember too much about this coaster, but all I remember that it was really smooth and really loud. And if you want to know what this coaster's like, then just look at the next coaster. They're pretty much all the same. Here's another GCI at number 15, and that GCI is American Thunder, a wooden coaster at Six Flags St. Louis in Eureka, Missouri. American Thunder and pretty much every other GCI that I've ridden are all really fast-paced, have a good first drop, and they're relatively smooth for a wooden coaster. But I think I rode this one on a good day, so it was running really well, but I don't really remember that much about this coaster, I just don't really remember that much about the coaster. Now, getting away from all the GCIs, at number 14, we have the first RMC on this list, Iron Rattler at Six Flags Fiesta Texas in San Antonio, Texas. And surprisingly, this is my lowest ranked RMC. I'm pretty sure it was running on a bad day, but I don't really get the hype about this coaster. Unlike most people, I think the best airtime moment is actually the first drop. The coaster is really short, which isn't that big of a deal, but it doesn't help it that much. I thought the dive off the airtime hill would be way better than it actually was. It was just okay, and I don't even remember getting too good of airtime. But the coaster's still a pretty solid ride, which is why it's number 14 on this list. And at number 13, we have the most unknown coaster on this list, Rollin' Thunder at the park at Oa in Foley, Alabama. This is a Zamperla vertical drop coaster that has some really wacky coaster restraints, but it probably has one of my favorite layouts of any coaster. Everything in this ride is just really solid, and it has some really good pops of ejector at the end, and there's really nothing bad about this coaster, except that there's like a pothole after the first drop, but it's not too bad. It's pretty smooth, cool inversions, and the airtime's decent. Now at number 12, I have Twisted Cyclone at Six Flags Over Georgia in Austell, Georgia. This is an RMC hybrid coaster that is really short, but it's still pretty good. So I knew this was going to be a short ride, but it was still way shorter than I thought it could be. Now, I know that I rode it in not the best conditions because there were only half-filled trains and it was very early in the morning, but it still felt like it was crawling through its amazing layout. So I'm just going to take what I got in it with a grain of salt. But just like every other RMC, the first drop had insane ejector, especially in the back row. And at number 11, I have Outlaw Run at Silver Dollar City in Branson, Missouri. An RMC wooden coaster that I think is a tad overrated, but it's still really great. I don't really have to say a lot, other than the first drop is amazing, the wave turn's great, the double barrel roll finale is a really great way to end a coaster, and it's probably the best part of the ride. For number 10, I put the new for 2020 coaster, Texas Stingray at SeaWorld San Antonio in San Antonio, Texas. Now, the other GCI coasters are great, but this one has to be my favorite. It's really smooth because it just opened, and unlike the other GCIs, it has a steep, straight drop that gives really good ejector. Now, as it may not have that much airtime hills, but it has a really fun layout that's all about speeds and high bank turns. Now at number 8, I have Time Traveler, a Mock Rides extreme spinning coaster at Silver Dollar City in Branson, Missouri. Now, this coaster would be really good if the cars were not spinning. But the cars are spinning, and that adds a whole nother element, making it an amazing ride. The first drop has to be one of my favorite drops of all time because it's just really insane having a vertical drop while spinning. And that makes it so you go down sideways, and it has really good ejector being yanked down. And the rest of the layout is okay, but it's mainly this high on the list because of that insane first drop. And at number 8, I have Hang Time at Knott's Berry Farm in Buena Park, California. a Gerstlauer Infinity Coaster. This coaster was my first vertical chain lift that I've been on, and it was pretty cool. But I went more in depth about this coaster in my review about it, so watch that if you want to see more of my opinions on this ride. Okay, so at number 7, I have the only flying coaster on this list, Tatsu at Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California, a B&M flying coaster that has to be one of the most intense coasters I've been on. Now, for most of the ride, it's a pretty graceful and amazing experience, being almost 200 feet in the air and looking straight down. But the pretzel loop, especially in the back row, is such a long moment of great intensity, and it just feels so awesome, and it's such a unique element. And now at number 6, there is the best coaster at my home park, New Texas Giant at Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington, Texas. It's an RMC hybrid coaster, but it is a really long ride, and it may not have the best or most memorable elements, but it sure has a lot of them. The insane amount of floater airtime really makes this a really enjoyable ride. And at number 5, I have my first and only B&M hypercoaster that I've ridden, Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia in Austell, Georgia. Now, this may have a slight advantage because it's really the only coaster this year that I've ridden with a full train, but it was still a really fun coaster, and its massive airtime hill and really long train really helped its placement on this list. The helix is also pretty intense, and it's a really long ride. Now at number 4, it's an amazing Morgan mini hypercoaster called Steel Eel at SeaWorld San Antonio in San Antonio, Texas. This ride has pretty loose restraints, and that makes the airtime insane. On every airtime hill, it practically lifts you up out of your seat, and you feel like that you're just floating for the entirety of the hill. And the fact that this ride is basically just a bunch of hills means that the sheer amount of airtime will definitely make it high on this list. And at number 3, here's the most underrated coaster I've been on, Screaming Eagle at Six Flags St. Louis in Eureka, Missouri. Now, this 110-foot tall PTC Woody is insanely fun. It's full of great floater and a lap bar that doesn't even touch me. When I rode this, it was raining and had a pretty empty train, but there's one main element, and it's the drop after the turnaround, and it's one of the best airtime moments I've ever experienced. So this coaster is pretty amazing, but there are still 2 more coasters that, in my opinion, are even better than this. We're officially at the top 2, so at number 2, I have Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster at Six Flags Fiesta Texas in San Antonio, Texas. Wow, that was difficult to say. Now, this RMC single rail coaster is pretty much a perfect coaster. Well, it would be a perfect coaster if it was a smidge longer. There's nothing bad with this coaster other than length. It has some of the best airtime, intensity, visuals, and it's one of my favorite looking coasters I've even seen. It has 3 main ejector airtime moments that are all in my top 10 favorite elements. It may be a really short ride, but it is still really amazing. Finally, we're at number 1, and at number 1 that we have Twisted Colossus at Six Flags Magic Mountain. This RMC dual hybrid coaster is insane. It's a really long ride. It duels sometimes, and the elements are amazing. Now, I rode this in the worst conditions to ride it. I rode it in the morning while it was raining with only 2 people on the train, so I have no idea how it rode so great. When I got to marathon this, I rode it 12 times in a row, and it felt like the ride just kept getting better and better. The airtime is insane. The Top Gun stall was a surreal moment, but if you want a more in-depth review, then just watch my old review on it. So that was my first video of 2021, and I hope you guys enjoyed this and got a better understanding on the types of coasters that I enjoyed.